To this now, the United States will implement a 30% tariff hike on imported goods from South Africa. Washington says there will be no extensions as trade negotiations with South Africa continue. The Democratic Alliance, on the other hand, warning that 100,000 jobs could be impacted if no deal is reached. Let's speak now to our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks, who joins us this evening. Simon, good evening. Our time. The Commerce Secretary in the White House has been commenting at the weekend, and his statements is clear, and that is that the August deadline is firm, that 1 August deadline is firm, and there'll be no extensions. Do we know whether there are any backroom door negotiations still being conducted here?
Well, we don't, Golly, in short, but I think that it is fair to say and important to point out that throughout this trade war that has been prosecuted by President Donald Trump, Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary, and other key figures within the administration, including the president himself, have invariably made threats and spoken about deadlines and insisted that dates in the diary were hard and fast. The latest date in the diary, of course, is August the 1st, later this week. That is when those tariffs are due to come into effect on goods brought to the United States from South Africa, and also a host of other countries that haven't yet succeeded in negotiating any kind of agreement with the Trump administration. Now, the Trump administration says all kinds of conversations are still underway. They have relentlessly been promising over the last several weeks that scores of deals were going to be unveiled. At one point, the president was talking about 90 trade deals in 90 days. Well, we haven't seen anything like that. We've seen a handful of agreements, prime among them the one that was inked over the last few hours with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen by Donald Trump in a pretty tense meeting that they had in Scotland. So the sands of time are running out for South African exporters to the United States, but I would not rule out the possibility of the ball being kicked down the road again by the Trump administration once we get to August the 1st itself.
President Trump has been said to be a person who is a good negotiator, and more we see almost a tit-for-tat kind of trading when it comes to these tariffs. Do we know what is wanted of South Africa that possibly could be leveraged here for that 30% to come down a little bit?
Look, it's extraordinarily difficult because this is not a standard trade negotiation. What the Trump administration has made absolutely crystal clear over just the last fortnight or so is that President Trump wants to eliminate all trading deficits that are enjoyed by other countries with the United States. And economists all agree that's practically an impossibility. There is no way that South Africa, for example, can buy as much product from the United States as it sells to the United States. There are real limits in terms of what economies, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, can achieve in terms of securing parity with the United States. President Trump says, well, it's very simple. If South African exporters want to avoid these tariffs, they need to come here in the United States and build production plants. Well, how do you do that if you are a vineyard in the Western Cape? I mean, you can't grow those grapes in Poughkeepsie, New York. How do you do it if you're exporting natural resources, gold and diamonds, for example, from South Africa to the United States? You can't simply move to the United States and mine for those minerals here. So there are real practical realities at work here that the Trump administration itself often fails to recognize. There There are clearly things, though, that the South African government could be doing to try and offer olive branches, and we saw some of that while President Ramaphosa was here for his very tense meeting in the Oval Office with President Trump. But the South African delegation left the United States saying that behind the scenes, conversations about the economy had been warmer than that kind of headline-grabbing controversy between President Trump and President Ramaphosa suggested. But, achieving what Donald Trump wants to achieve is extraordinarily difficult, not just for South Africa, but for countries all over the world. And that's why so few of these trade deals have actually been signed.
Yeah, and you remind me of a conversation I watched this morning, Simon, over the Scottish whiskey, that it can only be made in Scotland, and perhaps this is one way of trying to negotiate with President Trump to say, this can only be made here, therefore can you exempt it from these tariffs? Let's move on to the Epstein files. This is something that has been a headache for President Trump. He made a commitment to make these public. Is he still willing to do that? Because the intimations are that his name is on those Epstein's files. What are these files to begin with?
Well, these are files relating to the disgraced and deceased financier Jeffrey Epstein, and they detail, in full detail, the names of those prominent Americans and other Americans and people from around the world that were welcomed by Jeffrey Epstein to his very controversial island, the one that he owned privately, how many times various people traveled aboard his private jet, colloquially described here as the Lolita Express because of allegations of nefarious and illegal activities that may have taken place on board that plane. Donald Trump is facing a massive headache over his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and all the efforts that the White House is making to distract from the attention that is receiving here in the United States have not succeeded. So when he returns here to Washington from Scotland, he's going to find that he is still very much in the eye of that storm. There are suggestions that the government is now preparing to release some of the documents. Earlier in the year, of course, the Attorney General Pam Bondi said the files were on her desk, ready to be reviewed and then released. Now the Department of Justice says that there are no files to release. There clearly are documents that have not been put into the public domain. And what the White House is doing is trying to suggest that Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was nowhere near as advanced or took place on as regular a basis as many other prominent figures in the United States, some of them allied with and members of the Democratic Party and its elites. So this thing is going to get really ugly because Donald Trump's conspiracy theory believing supporters are like a dog with a bone, and they are simply not going to let go of their insistence that they need to see exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was up to, who was up to it with him, and whether not it was Donald Trump that was implicated in some of those documents.
Simon Marks, thank you very much, as always, putting things into perspective for us, our Washington correspondent.